We're live, Doc.
We're live. All right. Hello, everyone. Welcome. It is Tuesday, 4 o'clock Pacific, 7 o'clock Eastern, midnight in Dublin, 1 a.m. in London and most of Europe. I am in Italy. It's 1 a.m. here. Good morning, everyone. And it's Facebook Live. I see that Christina's the first one that types in a hello, and Christina's in Costa Rica. She watches every week. Thank you, Christina. Nice to know you're out there. Really great. And Jane says there's a wobbly echo. Unfortunately, the internet where I am is the best that's available. I hope it doesn't stay that way, and I hope you guys can hear me. Jan's in Vancouver, and we are live. So our guest is not here yet, which is just fine. I'm sure he'll be here in a moment or two. And, it's interesting when it's 1 a.m. and the alarm goes off at 12:15. I went to bed with Geo at, about 8:30. And so my immediate thing was, why did I not turn that alarm off? My brain said, turn it off, go back to sleep. So I'm glad to be here. And Dr. Vincent Pedre is our guest today. And Dr. Pedre has a new book out that we're going to be talking about called the GutSMART Diet. And he'll be here soon. In the meantime, I had the privilege of doing an interview just a few hours ago with Dr. Natasha Campbell-McBride on the Know We Well channel. For those of you that don't know We Well, that's KNOWEWELL, knowwewell.com is a great source for a lot of information. And we've had many of my friends join Know We Well to put their educational programs and their knowledge in there. Know We Well's goal is to carry information out to transform healthcare in the world. And most of it is completely free, which is great. And Dr. Natasha Campbell-McBride, who we had on the show a couple of weeks ago here on Facebook Live, I asked her, how'd you get involved with all this? And she said, well, she was a neurologist, a medical doctor and neurologist, and her firstborn developed autism. And she said, I had to heal him, so I had to learn. And she just went right back to the beginning. I said, well, what happened before that? And what she told us was that when she was a child, she was very sick and no one could help her, and they thought she was going to die. And her mother sent a letter to her mother, so Natasha's grandmother, who lived out in the country somewhere in Russia, and got on a train and came and took her granddaughter back to the farm. And the next time her parents saw her, which was 8 months, I think, 8 months later, she was completely healed. And it was diet, just changing the diet did all of this. Hello, Dr. Peel, welcome.
Hi, nice to see you.
Thank you, and you. I was just talking about an interview I did earlier today with Dr. Natasha Campbell-McBride. And she is a world-renowned expert on autism, and she started the GAPS diet, which stands for Gut and Psychology Syndrome. And she was talking about how she was sick as a child, and her grandmother healed her by bringing her to the farm and just feeding her fermented foods and good quality food when no one else could help, no doctors could help, and their parents thought she was going to die, and changing the diet. So from a child she went to medical school, but she knew that food had everything to do with how our bodies function. And now,
imagine
that. Isn't that a great one? Right. So today we're going to talk with
somehow medicine forgot that along the way.
Well, I'm not sure that they ever knew. Unfortunately, and we've recommended this at times when people are wanting confirmation from their medical doctor about something they've read or they've heard from another doctor, and they ask their medical doctor about it. One of the criteria I suggest is you ask your medical doctor, how many courses in nutrition have they had in their education? And unfortunately, it's usually not very much. It's not until after they get out of their medical education and in post-grad, they learn their jaw drops. And that's what happened. Dr. Peel is a fellow faculty at the Institute for Functional Medicine. And so we've seen it hundreds and hundreds of times how doctors in the 5-day program we do called Applied Functional Medicine and Clinical Practice, many times at the breaks, people come up to us and they've got tears in their eyes that this is what they've been looking for their entire lives and why they got into medicine. So once they learn this information, it brings so much joy to them because they're on a.
The thing that I've seen over the years, which has really disappointed me, and also, I think, God, how do I say this? Doctors have such influence over people, medical doctors.
Yes.
And I have heard colleagues with no nutrition training giving wrong nutrition advice to patients who then think of them as such an authority that what they have said is the Bible. And these are people who never studied nutrition, should not be giving nutrition advice.
Exactly. Exactly. Unfortunately, it's all too common because our doctors think they have to know everything about health. That's their training. And so when they give information to a patient who is sick and really hoping to find some guidelines on how to get healthy again or how to get their child healthy again, they listen without a screening ear. They just want help, and so they believe what their doctor tells them. And
right.
Unfortunately,
and the medical doctor, who told the medical doctor that nutrition had nothing to do with it?
Right.
Pharma infused education.
Right? I can't tell you. Well, I can tell you there were many, many times where I would talk to a patient about a leaky gut. The slang term is leaky gut, and they'd go back to their internist or family practitioner who say there's no such thing as a leaky gut. And they just haven't read any of the thousands of articles now on this. And there are still gastroenterologists saying that today. So it's unfortunate. So it's confusing for people. So what we do here in Facebook Live is bring on world experts in a particular area. And I'm really happy to have Dr. Vincent Pedre here today, or Pedre, Pedre, to talk about his new book, the GutSMART Protocol. So let's begin by asking you, what fueled you to write a book about gut? And why is gut so important? Let's start there.
Well, this is my second book. My first book, Happy Gut, came out about 7 years ago. And the inspiration for that was my own journey and then working with patients on gut health issues. Because I had been on 20 plus rounds of antibiotics as a child, completely destroyed my gut microbiome, my immune system. I would get sick over and over. And every time my parents took me to the pediatrician, I was walking out with another prescription for antibiotics. And actually, it got to the point where sometimes I wasn't responding to antibiotics. So I don't know if you know about this, but back in the 80s, they would give you a gamma globulin shot if you weren't responding to an antibiotic. So my parents would take me back to the doctor and they would give me a gamma globulin shot. And every time I got the shot, I immediately started feeling better, like within hours, by the next day, 24 hours. And it was almost like I was getting a surrogate immune system that because my own immune system wasn't working. Well, no one stopped to think that 70 to 80% of our immune system is all along the gut lining, and that the more antibiotics they gave me, the more they were destroying that interface and the important regulation that happens there between the microbiome and our immune system. And of course, I didn't have an immune response. So I was getting sick over and over. And then I got into medical school and, I was always actually, I grew up in a house where my dad was very curious about nutrition. And even though he didn't have all the information, he had some. And at one point during our childhood, he had put up a paper. I don't know if you remember, like those refrigerators where they were all magnetic and you could stick things on them.
Right.
And so
Right.
he put a paper up and stuck it up with the magnets. And it was a paper of all the restaurants that we should not eat at. And on the top of the page, it had a skull and crossbones. And it was McDonald's, Burger King, Pizza Hut, Wendy, all the fast food saying all this stuff is bad for you. You should not be eating there. And that's where we were eating as kids. At times
Yes.
we did
Yes.
have a lot of home cooking, also because we were immigrants. So I think you always have the grandmother living with you. So there was a lot of home cooking also. And so I suffered from gut issues for over 2 decades, even through medical school, even through residency. I mean, through residency, my gut was an absolute mess. I mean, talk about throwing your gut off, having to work a 24-hour shift, being up all night. My digestion was a mess. You go home at the end of that and you're both hungry and nauseous at the same time. And you want to eat because you're starving, but you know that when you eat, you're not going to feel good. I had no handle on what was going on with my gut. And I was looking for a language. What I did have is intuitively, I knew that the language I was being taught to take care of gut issues was not the full story. And I was reading books by Dr. Hyman, Dr. Deepak Chopra, so I was very open-minded to these things. But it wasn't until I discovered functional medicine that I was able to unravel over 2 decades of suffering from gut health issues that seemed unexplainable to me, and then really make changes in my diet, probiotics, fermented foods, cutting out pesticides, eating clean meats. And I started seeing and cutting out gluten. I found out that I was gluten sensitive, and the results were immediate. Like within 2 weeks, I was already starting to feel like a different person. And I couldn't believe it. And then in a month, I felt better. And in 3 months, I felt even better. And I continued the diet. I sometimes tested and saw how I would react to gluten. And it was interesting because this is something for people to know. When you cut out a food like gluten, say you're gluten reactive, and you thought you weren't having any reactions to it before because your immune system was absolutely overwhelmed and you're creating immune complexes and it's very hard to read. When you reintroduce the food, you can have a brand new symptom that you never knew, never existed before. And for me, when I tested wheat, because I wanted to see, I cut it out for 3 months. Let me see if I have a little bit, what's going to happen? Tiny red rash on the inside of my wrist that got itchy and started, okay, this is not logical, within 10 to 15 minutes of having something with wheat, which makes, when you think about it mechanistically, like that food has not even fully digested, and yet it's already reacting in my system. And I thought, okay, well, maybe this is unusual. Maybe it was a coincidence in time. I'm trying to be objective scientist. So I thought I'm going to avoid it for another 3 months. And at 6 months, I'm going to test it again. Same bread, same thing, same rash on the inside of the wrist. There I knew, okay, pattern recognition. This is not coincidental. And I got really curious because what frustrated me most about training in Western medicine was the limited language that we had to care for gut issues. IBS was this one big giant thing that only had like about 4 solutions. You give somebody an antispasmodic, something for diarrhea, something for constipation, or an antidepressant. And that's how you cure IBS. And I thought, well, this doesn't seem right. Like, is IBS one thing? It's just one thing, and everybody has the same thing. And so when I discovered functional medicine, it was like, it's almost like Dorothy in The Wizard of Oz, going from the black and white world to the color world. of
Yes.
Oz, where suddenly you're like, oh my God, like
Yes.
all of this exists?
Yes.
Really? There can be parasites, yeast, dysbiosis, leaky gut, food sensitivities. All of this stuff could be going on in a patient that has IBS? Really?
Yes.
And no one taught me
Yes.
this in medical school. So I just became really curious about gut health, and I realized that there was a deficiency in knowledge in the population. And I think I was a really much an early adopter, because my first book came out very early on when people barely knew what the word microbiome meant. They barely understood it back in 2015. So I was a little bit early out the gate. And then just had a lot of experience taking care of gut health patients for the last couple of years, and refining and refining and refining, and just looking at how books for gut health, and even my first book, one size fits all, this is the plan, it's going to help everyone, but realizing that gut patients are not all the same. Some are much more severe, and the advice and what they can do is different from someone who has moderate issues and different from someone who has mild issues. And so I wanted to put together a book that really addressed that. And it was a big challenge. I didn't realize, I came up with this beautiful idea, and then I realized, oh, this is not
I'll
easy.
write the book, right?
This
Yes.
is not easy to do, because I wanted to write a personalized gut healing plan based on a quiz that I created that would divide people into mild, moderate, or severe. And then based on that, we created food lists. I teamed up with nutritionists, with fermentationists, and created food lists that are divided by the categories, and then recipes and meal plans for these different categories. And I wanted to write a book that kind of brought in all my experience. So I know a lot of people, I mean, a lot of the doctors in this space, and they write a book about one topic, and they move on to the next topic, and then they move on to the next topic, and then, but I've really chosen to stay in the gut space and go as deep as possible. And I'm really happy that I did, because this is an endless space. Like the studies that just keep coming out, the amount of stuff that we're learning about the gut microbiome and the role it plays in everything: skin health, mental health, dementia, Alzheimer's, your airway health, immune system, metabolism, energy. I really think that it's almost endless. Like, we're not going to stop learning about this, and there's still so much to learn in the coming years. But I wanted to basically take all my experience and my knowledge and kind of refine what I did with my first book, and come up with a program that I think can be applied to everyone anywhere in the world can do it, because it's a food-based program. It's a mind, body, spirit, you could say, program with a lot of breath work and meditation towards the end of the book. But all of it is important.
Critically important, critically. Priscilla writes that she's in Waterloo, Iowa, where they struggle to find a replacement for a brilliant, compassionate functional medicine physician who died 3 years ago. And Priscilla, it's this type of book that Dr. Pedre is talking about, where you get so much guidance on how to keep the big picture overview. Our colleague and friend, Dr. Alessio Fasano, is a professor of medicine at Harvard. He's the director of the Celiac Research Center, the director of mucosal immunology, which means the lining of the gut, the lining of the brain, the lining of the lungs. He's in charge of that whole department at Harvard. And he talks about, he wrote a paper 2 years ago that says it all. All disease begins in the gut.
Yes.
And that's the title of the paper. And in the parentheses, leaky gut. All disease begins in the leaky gut. So as you learn how to build a healthy, strong microbiome, that's all of the ingredients inside the gut, the bacteria, the viruses, all of it that's there. As you learn how to support a healthy microbiome, which I'm sure Dr. Vincent's book is just loaded with information on that, then you find that your family's health gets stronger and stronger and stronger.
Yeah,
Critically important concept.
rebuilding the gut microbiome, rebuilding the mucin layer, that thin layer of mucus that is right on the inside of the gut lining, and then repairing the tight junctions between the cells that line the gut.
Yes.
That's critical for reducing inflammation. Dr. Alessio Fasano talked about the triad that triggers autoimmune disease, which is a combination of a genetic predisposition, an environmental trigger, which could be a bacteria, it could be a food, it could be like gluten. And then third thing, so if you have these two, but you also need leaky gut. And when you have that combination, then you have the makings for what can, over time, evolve to become autoimmune disease. But like you said, there's so many other interconnections, metabolic syndrome, diabetes, so many diseases. We're finding, there was a study that they did on germ-free mice. And I thought this was really fascinating. They used germ-free mice to test out what might be the role of the gut microbiome in different disease models, right? So they looked at an Alzheimer's disease model where the mice that have Alzheimer's, they build up plaque, beta amyloid plaque in the brain. And then they took these germ-free mice and they found that they don't have beta amyloid plaque. Okay, so they're a control for Alzheimer's, let's say. Now they did a stool transplant, so fecal transplant. They share the bacteria from the Alzheimer's mice with the germ-free mice that didn't have beta amyloid plaque in the brain. And then after a certain period of time, a couple of weeks, then look and see what's happening in the brain of these germ-free mice that now have been given the microbiome of those Alzheimer's mice, and now they have beta amyloid plaque in the brain.
I remember in 2010, a new paper came out that talked about pre-symptomatic Parkinson's. And no one had ever talked about pre-symptomatic Parkinson's, what are the indicators beforehand? And what they identified was that it was misfolded proteins. So proteins in the gut, they get twisted, if I can say it that way, and they don't fit in a lock and key system anymore. And these misfolded proteins were going neuron by neuron up the spinal cord into the brain. And these misfolded proteins, and they were attracted, magnetically pulled into the area of the brain where Parkinson's develops. So the question was, where are these misfolded proteins coming from? And it was the first paper that I ever saw that identified it was the bacteria in the gut. If you have too many bad guys and not enough good guys in the gut, you don't have the diversity. The environment will start to change those proteins, and then they creep up the spine, the vagus nerve, and they go right up the spine, right into the brain. It takes years for that to happen. And they identified it 20 years before there were symptoms of Parkinson's. So that's why almost all Parkinson's patients have a long history of constipation, is because their gut microbiome is so far out of balance.
There was actually a study that was just published on May 2nd, and it's gut microbiome dysbiosis across early Parkinson's disease and what they call REM sleep behavior disorder, which is a precursor to Parkinson's, or they call it prodromal Parkinson's.
That's a tongue twister.
Prodromal Parkinson's. And the interesting thing is what they found in this study is that there was a depletion of butyrate producing bacteria. Mm-hmm. And in their place was an overabundance of certain inflammatory bacteria, which these are kind of new names for me, like Collinsella, Desulfovibrio, Oscillospiraceae. Like these are hard names. It sounds
Klingon. It's Klingon.
Tongue twisters. But right. For people listening, butyrate is a short chain fatty acid, which is a very powerful anti-inflammatory, but it also has epigenetic effects. It's what we call a histone acetylase inhibitor. And what that means is histone is one of the control mechanisms for DNA expression. And so this butyrate goes to the brain and it inhibits histone, which then opens up the DNA at a certain regions to express whatever gene is there. And it increases the expression of brain-derived neurotrophic factor, which helps with neuroplasticity and learning and memory. So it's really interesting that they found in this prodromal Parkinson's, early Parkinson's, that there is a depletion of these butyrate-producing bacteria.
Yep, and butyrate is one of those messengers that's produced. You know, if I exercise and I exercise too hard, the next day my muscle can be sore, and we know that's lactic acid. That's produced in the muscle cells, and my body couldn't flush out enough of it, so some of it stuck around, and the muscle's sore the next day, maybe for a day or two. And I call it the exhaust of the muscle cell. And the bacteria in your gut produce exhaust. They're metabolites.
Yeah.
Now, it was Professor Yehuda Schonfeld that told us that 36% of all the small molecules in healthy blood are the metabolites of the microbiome. It's the exhaust of the bacteria in the gut.
We call it the metabolome.
Right. And if you have too much of the bad guys in the gut, well, the exhaust they're producing is too strong a message of inflammation in your bloodstream that goes to your brain and to your heart and to your liver and to your kidneys. So it'll manifest wherever your genetic vulnerability is, but it's the inflammation that is the problem. And
you know,
those genes of inflammation are turned on by the exhaust of the bad guys in the gut. So the goal
Dr.
is,
Tom, I think that, maybe 5 years from now, I think we're going to probably be looking more at studies that look at the metabolome, what's being expressed by the gut bacteria. And we'll probably think that stool studies that only looked at gut bacteria are probably at that point archaic. And now, we do look at a lot of PCRs and things like that, but I think we really have to start thinking about figuring out what these postbiotic nutrients do and how important. I mean, even bioflavonoids, polyphenols from plants, very important antioxidant powerhouses for the body, but these molecules are too big for the body to absorb. So they need to be broken down by the microbiome into smaller molecules that then get absorbed by the body. So a lot of these polyphenols, we don't have access to them before the microbiome metabolizes them.
And if you don't have enough of the good guys to break down the polyphenols, the healthy components from our fruits and vegetables and things we eat, if you don't have enough of the good guys in your gut to break them down, you can't get the benefits of those excellent foods that you're choosing. We have a question here from Lena. She says, can you please tell me about this? Is it healthier to adopt a dairy-free diet? We used to hear that yogurt supports the good gut.
That's a really great question. This question has multi-layers. I think it's not a black and white. It's a shades of gray answer. But I'll start with saying that, when people think of dairy, I think the most common thing they think of is, am I lactose intolerant or not?
Right.
And that's only one layer of problems with dairy. The other bigger layer that people have problems with is when they develop a sensitivity to one of the proteins in dairy, either the casein or the whey. And that actually causes more problems. And when they look at the different types of dairy, cow dairy tends to be the most antigenic. When you look at studies, so they've looked at cow dairy, goat milk, sheep milk, camel milk. The one that is the most likely to react, if you just randomly take 50 people off the street and check their blood against all these different types of dairy, you're going to find that the majority are going to react to cow dairy. They're going to have some sort of IgG response to cow dairy. They might react to goat, to sheep, The least reactive is camel milk, which has been used in some healing protocols. And camel milk is almost right next to, most people are not going to have immune reaction to human milk, right? Camel milk is the closest to human milk antigenically. So that's why a lot of people, and it's been used in the autism community for children with autism. There's been reports of camel milk helping to reverse some food sensitivities and stuff with its factors. Now, dairy gets a little more complicated because the type of dairy most people are being exposed to is homogenized pasteurized dairy, where all the real nutrients and enzymes have been removed. So it's actually magnified the antigenicity of dairy. But for the most part, a lot of people are going to have problems. I mean, already 70 to 90% of the world population is lactose intolerant. And secondly, depending on the type of dairy. So if you're looking at, ideally, if you wanted to have dairy and you could have a raw fermented dairy yogurt or kefir drink, that would be a healthier way to get that than having a pasteurized, a lot of the stuff that's in the supermarket, or make it yourself. Making homemade yogurt from dairy is part of the GAPS diet, right?
Yes, it is. Mm-hmm.
So it can be very gut healing. And against my own intuition, well, not against my logical thinking, when I came back from Guatemala during the pandemic and I had giardia, and I've been dairy free mostly since 2007, my intuition said that I actually needed fermented dairy to heal my gut. And the two things that helped me heal my gut were fermented dairy drink and bone broth. And that's how I healed from the parasite infection. Now, once I was healed, I went off of dairy because I don't really drink dairy, and for the most part, and there's a lot of ways to get the benefits of fermented dairy in the form of coconut yogurt and other fermented, cashew, kefir. So there's a lot of different ways that you can get this. I've got recipes for fermented vegetables, sauerkraut in the book, the cabbage and carrots. It's so easy to make this. I just made, I'm very proud of this. I just made my best sauerkraut that I've made with purple cabbage and carrots. And I actually used a couple of things that probably are not in most people's kitchen cabinet. Obviously, you always use salt, so I use sea salt, but I added an organ-based seasoning to get those B vitamins. So it's called Pluck. So it's freeze-dried and it's grass-fed. So it's coming from really good animals. And then I also added cumin seeds.
Oh.
And a little bit of red pepper flakes to give it a tiny touch of spiciness.
A little sassy.
But not being overwhelming. But these fermented foods, there's a study that I talk about in my book that was done in Stanford University where they looked at they basically took a group of people. It wasn't a big study, so we got to put that out there that this was not a big, study, and it didn't have a lot of. It did have a lot of different ages, like from 32 to 70 something, but it was more women than men. But they took them and they divided them into two groups. One, they gave them a high fiber diet, and the other one, they put them on a high fermented foods diet. And they were looking at underlying markers. This was a 17-week long study, 4-week ramp up, 6 weeks at the higher level. So if you're eating fiber, you were eating 40 grams of fiber at least per day, whereas most people are eating about 10 grams of fiber per day.
Right.
And for the fermented foods, this sounds pretty crazy. They were having people eat 4 to 6 servings per day during the 6 weeks where they were ramped up to the highest amount. And that's a lot of ferment, but they were getting it as vegetable brine drinks along with yogurt. So it was easy to drink the ferment, because 4 to 6 servings, that's like 4 to 6 cups of fermented foods, and they increased it slowly over the 4 weeks. They tested their microbiome at the beginning, and they used different indices for microbial diversity. And they also took a blood test to look at immune activation. And then they tested them at the end to see, well, what happens? What's happened to microbial diversity? What's happened to 19 different inflammatory markers, including cellular activation, so white blood cell activation through cytokines.
Mhm.
And the interesting thing, Tom, is that, you know, in functional medicine, we talk about eating fiber, how great fiber is, it's prebiotic, feeds the microbiome. So I really thought that the fiber-rich group was going to be the one that created the most microbial diversity,
Mhm.
but it wasn't.
Mhm.
It was the fermented foods group that increased their microbial diversity the most. And it was the fermented foods group that dropped 19 inflammatory markers.
Mhm.
The fiber group was interesting because they behaved differently depending on their baseline microbial diversity. So they actually took the fiber-rich group and they divided them into 3 groups when they realized that their microbial diversity wasn't the same across all the people in the fiber group. And when they looked at that, they saw that fiber served as an immune modulator in the high diversity. The people who started with higher microbial diversity, fiber actually lowered immune activation, but in people with low microbial diversity, fiber actually increased immune activation.
That's really interesting. That's really interesting. That's the key. So we've always known that fiber is supposed to be really important, but if you've got way too many bad guys already in your gut, and fiber is feeding, the goal is to feed the good guys who thrive on the fiber, but some of the bad guys are going to thrive on it also. So
Yeah.
the idea of the inoculation by eating fermented foods, and you're putting more good guys down there. You're changing the environment so that the less amount of fiber you're eating compared to the 2 groups, but you've got more of the good guys down there. You're producing more of the metabolites, the messengers, sending anti-inflammatory messages out into the system on the highway. You know, your bloodstream's just a highway.
Modulating the immune response. And the interesting thing also was that it wasn't that eating a fermented food, which might have lactobacillus, acidophilus, you know, different types of organisms, not that many, right? What's in the fermented foods is certainly a drop in the ocean when it comes to what's actually inside the gut. So how is it increasing microbial diversity? You know, that was the other question. Why is putting bacteria into the gut going to increase the diversity of bacteria? And the answer is that these bacteria are producing postbiotic products, metabolites, that are feeding the other bacteria. So they're actually supporting the growth of other strains that may not be in the fermented, if it's sauerkraut, whatever it is, they're going in there and they're actually helping support the entire ecosystem.
Yes, yes. You know, I'm reminded of the phrase, a rising tide raises all boats, right? And so the more of the good guys you're inoculating with, the more the families of good guys will expand. I want to go back to what you said about camel milk, because I fully agree with you. And we're going to put the link here to Desert Camel Milk. They're a farm in the Midwest that has been now for probably at least 10 years that I'm aware of. They've been producing camel milk and camel milk products. I remember when I first met them, they asked if they could give me some of their product. And I said, camel milk? You know, I think of this animal and I was like, ooh, right? You know,
Yeah.
it just didn't make sense to me at all. I said, sure, okay. And so I brought it home and it sat in my refrigerator and I just couldn't get myself to try it. And after a few weeks, I think I threw it out because it goes bad, you know, if it's sitting around too long. And I saw that those folks at another conference a few months later, oh, Doc, what did you think of the camel milk? And I said, well, unfortunately, I travel so much, I didn't have a chance to try it, right? Oh, we'll give you some more. And, oh, okay. So I thought I'd try it and it was delicious. I hadn't had milk in cereal in many, many years. And I grew up, I'd take graham crackers and crush them and pour milk in them when I was a kid as a snack. And And it was just delicious. And I found that my body really enjoyed it. I didn't have any altered effects. And so I've been a strong component now because camel milk, the molecular structure of camel milk is one of the closest of any mammal to human breast milk. The proteins are smaller, so the human body can digest them. So there are four, I believe it is. It's camel, reindeer, donkey, and there's one more that, so I'll say the three for now. I can't remember the fourth one, that most people that have a dairy sensitivity, especially children, they can have those milks. And camel milk is now commercially produced, and we'll put the link in here for people.
Yeah, I saw it. I saw your team put it up. Yeah, and the thing is that what's really unique about these milk is these oligosaccharides, these short oligosaccharides that are actually acting as a prebiotic that helps develop the microbiome in early life in the infant. It's very important for growing Bifidobacterium infantis, which is super important in early childhood. There was actually a study, another, again, in a mouse study that was looking at the activation of the HPA axis, depending on what was in the gut of the mice. And they found that the gut microbiome, especially Bifidobacterium infantis, helped basically control the wiring of the HPA axis in the limbic system to prevent overactivation. And if you don't have that bacteria, then you're going to develop an overactivated limbic system. So this child that maybe wasn't breastfed, that was fed with soy formula, might also end up being a bit more reactive in the world, like having less of an ability to deal with stress and less resilience because of the lack of the programming that was very important that needed to happen early in life.
Jill has an interesting question. I eat all the things you mentioned, no dairy, sugar, gluten, clean meat only, organic, etc. For 2 years I've done this, and yet I still get stomach aches all the time. There are still so many foods I can't eat: quinoa, beans, bananas, vegetable broth, onions, garlic, without getting pain or incredible gas. I get 40 to 50 grams of fiber per day and have normal stool. What am I doing wrong? Well, first, I'm just going to say, Jill, you're not doing anything wrong. You're approaching this from a very healthy perspective. You're doing the right thing, but there's some emergency brake. You know, if you back out of the driveway and you say, what's wrong with this car? It's hardly going backward. Oh, the emergency brake. And then you let go of the emergency brake and you back up fine. So there's an emergency brake that's not been identified yet. And so that's the goal, to find the emergency brake. Dr. Vincent, what might you think, where might she start with that?
Yeah, did she say how old she is?
No.
So that's an important question, because if she's having food reactions, one of the first places to look, okay, she just put, I'm 61. Okay, so that's sort of what I thought. So if she's having food reactions like this, one of the first things to think about is stomach acid production adequate enough?
Exactly.
And the older you are, probably we lose stomach acid production as we get older. There are things that get in the way of stomach acid production. If you're living a very stressed out life, you're stressed about things in general in life, you know, the essentials, money, shelter, those things, or having relationship turmoil, all that can affect your vagal tone, which then will cause a drop in stomach acid production. And so then it makes it difficult to break down certain foods and nutrients. So number one, I would think of what's happening with stomach acid. It sounds like maybe there's low stomach acid, and maybe there needs to be some replacement of stomach acid, maybe some stimulation with you know, betaine HCl. Make sure to get the right proteases to break down protein, some gentian root as well to stimulate that stomach acid production. And then the next thing I think about, and I don't know if she said, is the things that we can't see with our eyes that are hidden, and you can't even taste them: pesticides, glyphosate in food. And it's very easy for that to sneak into the food supply, even when you're trying to be as clean as possible. So I think really looking at the foods that are being eaten, and then secondly, or thirdly, thinking about, what types of foods are they? Because in Peru, they will soak their quinoa, rinse it, and then cook it after it's been soaked and rinsed. And that reduces some of the phytic acid, the anti-nutrients on the surface. So there's certain foods that are not as gut friendly when they're made fresh from the way that nature produced them. And they can be altered to make them more gut friendly. So obviously looking at all of these things and figuring out through gut testing, through blood testing, is there a leaky gut? Is there a dysbiosis? Is there pancreatic insufficiency? You can check for pancreatic elastase 1 in the stool. And these are things that I talked about in my first book, Happy Gut, talked a lot about the testing and all that. But these are some of the ways to think about it, basically looking at the root cause, doing a root cause analysis. And of course, she's not right in front of me, but there would be a very extensive history, because what I've learned, and I'm sure you've learned over time, is that the devil is in the details. And usually the patient tells you where the problem is before you even get all the testing done.
I agree. And your first response was the same thing I thought of right away, and that was hydrochloric acid, because of the age. And Jill, there's an excellent book on Amazon by my friend and mentor, Dr. Jonathan Wright, who has been a pioneer for 40 years in this world of a bigger picture view. And the book is called Why Hydrochloric Acid is Good for You. And when you read that simple little book, it just starts to make sense that first on the checklist for both Dr. Vincent and I, in our minds, was hydrochloric acid. That was the first thing. And when you read this book, you'll pick up the pearls of what lifestyle things do I need to include, and what kind of hydrochloric acid is good for me, and how much to take, and all of that. You'll get that. And it's a paperback, easy read. You'll be done with the book in a couple of hours. Not technical at all, but just makes sense. So my recommendation would be two things. One, read that book to determine if you're making enough hydrochloric acid. And then two, I would do a test to see if there's some bad bacteria, if there's something out of balance in your gut that's the emergency brake holding you back. And if you don't have a, go ahead.
Oh, go on. Sorry.
Okay. If you don't have a functional medicine doctor right now you're working with, the test that I would recommend would be the gut zoomer, because you zoom in on the problem. And as you know, because Jill's been here with us a lot over the years on Facebook Live, I recognize you, Jill. Thank you so much. You can get the zoomer tests. If your doctor won't order them, you can order them on my website. Just go to theDr.com and you'll find the gut zoomer there. So doing that test, it's difficult to interpret that test, but we have a couple of doctors that I've just been interviewing who are going to be, we'll announce it in a few weeks, I think, but they'll be interpreting tests for people. We're just going to give you a list of doctors who are happy to do a conference call with you and interpret your test for you. So those are
and I will say the gut
Vincent.
zoomer will help you differentiate dysbiosis, pancreatic insufficiency, how well meat and vegetables are being broken down. It's not going to necessarily give you whether you have low stomach acid, but that, the quinoa stands out because quinoa is a complete protein, so it's hard to break down if you don't have enough stomach acid and proteases. So it's one of those telltale signs that, like I said, the patient tells you what the problem is. You just have to listen really closely, and then be open-minded and always ask the question, what else can be going on, so that you don't miss things that are less obvious.
Agreed.
There's another book out there. It's called Why Zebras Don't Get Ulcers.
Right. That's a Robert Zumpolsky's book. Excellent book. Excellent book. Zebras don't get ulcers, but their entire life, every day, they're on the lookout for lions that want to eat them, every day. But they don't get ulcers. So that's the concept he came from, and it opened my mind to this whole concept of stress and how stress affects us. It's really a good one.
And stress is like an attack on the gut.
Yeah.
So I think it's a very important piece of the puzzle that cannot be ignored, because I think when people are thinking about their gut health, they just think about food, nutrition, supplements, but a lot of times they end up ignoring the mind gut piece, the gut brain part of it. And it's just as essential as the nutrition.
Agreed. I'm going to do a shout out here to my team because someone wrote in, does anyone know if there's camel's milk in Australia? And my team, within a few minutes, put down 3 links in Australia for camel milk. So way to go, Anne. Thank you so much for being on top of this. Lena has a comment here. She said, from my knowledge, that H. pylori related to acid levels. I'm not sure if it's common here in the US, but it is in the Middle East. Could be possible in her case. And you're absolutely right, Lena. That's why you would want to do a gut test, is to identify if there's bad guys in the gut that shouldn't be there. But that's a really good concept. And thank you for sharing that. Great. And then Jill said, thanks, Lena, but I tested negative for H. pylori, already had the GutSMART test. Okay, Jill. So you ruled out any of those pathogens by doing the right test for that. Way to go. So I would get that book, Why Hydrochloric Acid is Good for You, and see what you find out from that.
I actually talk about a protocol for low stomach acid in my first book, Happy Gut.
Marvelous. Dr. Vincent, when you talk about making fermented vegetables and making your own type of sauerkraut and things, is it for people that have never thought about this before, how difficult is it to make fermented vegetables?
It is the easiest thing possible that you can make. And actually, I feel that it's also kind of like therapy, because the first thing you're doing, say you're making a sauerkraut, is you're chopping up the cabbage into smaller pieces, right? And then you're going to put it in a big bowl, and you're going to fill it up. You're going to put the salt in, and it's going to start softening. But then you've got to massage it. So you've got to get your hands in there, and you get a little bit dirty in your hands, but you can feel the vegetable starting to soften, and you're mixing the salt, and it's releasing water and softening. And that part itself can be very therapeutic. I also find cooking to be a stress reliever, because to me, it's an art. Like, you wonder, like, okay, this time I'll put some cumin seeds. Next time, well, let me put some dill in there. And what would go well with dill? What other, maybe some celery salt or something else like that. And then once you finish, I use the Shawami fermenter that has a top that has a gas release. And it's a really interesting top because it's a mason jar. You stuff everything in the mason jar. You fill it up 1 inch above the top of the vegetables with brine, and then you close it, and it has a spring mechanism that pushes it down with a air release, and then it has a little moat where you can put water, and then another like upside down cup that you put at the top, and it allows, as it's fermenting, to release the gas so it doesn't build up on the inside. And you leave it there for about 5 to 7 days, and at the end of it, you can kind of control. You might want to open and test it and see, at 5 days, is it sour enough? Do you like it? And I kept mine for 7 days because I like it to be a bit more sour. And then in the fridge, and then it's going to last for a very long time in the fridge. This is what they used for food preservation back in the day when we didn't have refrigerators, there were no ice boxes. Fermentation was a way to lengthen the lifespan of a food, because the bacteria that build up in the food and lower the acidity, because they're producing things like lactic acid, then actually prevent the growth of other bad organisms in the food.
I mentioned earlier in the show that I did an interview earlier today with Dr. Natasha Campbell McBride, and she was saying that, you harvest cabbage in September. And if whatever you don't eat within a couple of weeks, it's going to go bad, and you have no more cabbage until next September.
Yeah.
But when you ferment the food, it lasts for years, a couple of years. And it was a way of making sure you had food all winter long, and in the spring when you're planting the next crops. This is before refrigeration. So it serves, humanity developed as a result of having this lifestyle of eating fermented foods that would keep us nourished and alive. It's just a really interesting concept when you think of it that way. We have a comment from the little Quincy, not little Quincy. Quincy is a mom, and Gracie is a little 9-year-old that watches every week from Iowa. And this week, some of the families at home watching. I assume Gracie's watching, while others are listening on their headphones while they're planting crops at a neighbor's home. And just want to say thank you so much for watching every week, for being such great people, great followers, and your comments. And it's just wonderful to have you as part of our tribe. Thank you to the Benson family in Iowa. And I'll never forget that picture of little 9-year-old Gracie sitting in front of the laptop at the kitchen table, watching every week, because she really wants to make sure her family is staying healthy. So thank you for that. That's really great. That's really great. We have another couple of questions here that are really interesting. The first one is, Doctor, I keep getting inundated from so many health websites. How can I tell if everything I get is accurate? And I'm going to let Dr. Vincent begin with that one.
That's a tough one, because there's a lot of crosstalk on the internet.
Mm-hmm.
There's a lot of information. There's a lot of disinformation as well. So I think first you have to do your research and see who is a trusted authority that you can follow what they put out, blog posts. Are they researched? Do they reference anything in the literature? Obviously, again, a book. My book has, God, I don't know how many, at the end, I think it had over 300 references before it was edited down. My book was heavily researched. So I think also really appreciate that when a book is written by a medical practitioner with a lot of references, that there has been a lot of thought put into that. It takes a lot of work to put a book together. And sometimes books are some of the best places to get educated and learn about these things. And depending, again, you want to make sure you follow a trusted authority, and you want to make sure they're not making claims that are not outlandish or not backed up by some research.
I fully agree. And, Jacqueline, I would add to that both Dr. Vincent and I are on the teaching faculty of the Institute for Functional Medicine. We've been doing this for years, and we both have a couple of books out there. My 2 books also each have over 300 references in them. And so if you can, and with the internet these days, it's not difficult to watch a video of whoever this author is that you're thinking about reading their book, or these websites. Just watch a video. And there are people that are really good salesmen. They're just great at it, but just listen to your intuition when you're watching someone, and see if your heart says, oh, this makes sense to me. You won't go wrong with Dr. Vincent's books. You won't go wrong with my books. They're right on the money for that. Anne asks, my mom has been throwing up for the past 24 hours. What's the best way to reset her gut now that she is better? Interesting question.
Ooh. Yeah, that's an interesting question. I mean, first thing, if you've been throwing up for 24 hours, possibly food poisoning is the first thing I think of. And you want to go really easy on the gut
Mhm.
after something like that. So it may be as simple as having just bone broth.
Mhm.
I'm also really big fan of steamed white rice after gut when there have been issues like this. The white
Mhm.
rice is a binder, it can bind toxin, it's soothing for the gut. So I really like that when there's been some really like a bad food poisoning or severe vomiting, something like that. You have to be careful with certain spices. So even though ginger is good for the gut, it might be too much of a warming spice after having vomited a lot. So you want to go
Mhm.
for things that are a bit more soothing, something like fennel tea, um, and yeah, lots of hydration, making
Yeah.
sure to get electrolytes in, and
Yeah.
advancing the diet slowly, just kind of testing it out before going back and eating a regular diet.
Yeah. If someone's been throwing up repeatedly over the course of a full day or something, you have to remember that your mom likely has what would be best associated with for visual carpet burns. You're wearing a pair of shorts and you slide on the carpet and you get a carpet burn. You don't want to put pants on after that because your knee has got a carpet burn on it, right? Because the pants will touch the burn and it's skin and it's irritating. So someone's been repeatedly throwing up, they're going to have irritation on their gut. So you want to start gentle. You want to start easy. The things like the steamed rice is a great one. I think of coconut yogurt to avoid, maybe they're sensitive to dairy, maybe not. So coconut yogurt is going to be safer, something like that. But also you have to investigate, why is mom throwing up? And that's
Yeah,
beyond this.
absolutely. Because one of the first things that I think of is gallbladder attacks. So you want to make sure that,
Mhm,
there's not something serious that needs to be addressed medically.
mhm. Let's see, Lena is asking, is dairy-free better? Reading Dr. Tom's book right now. What about how good yogurt is good for your gut? So that's a really good point. Yeah, absolutely. Yogurt is great for your gut because of the inoculation of the good guys that you're getting. And coconut yogurts are very, very common now. You don't have to have the larger protein structure of the dairy. Now, yogurt is going to be a little less offensive than drinking a glass of milk, but it still has the same protein structure. So we know that when people have a wheat-related disorder, whether it's celiac or just gluten sensitivity, I shouldn't say just, or gluten sensitivity or a wheat allergy, we know that about 50% of those people also have an immune reaction to dairy. And so that's why the general recommendation is, when you're going gluten-free, to also go dairy-free to begin with, until you can do a test. Now, the test is, my rule of thumb is test, don't guess. And the test is called the Dairy Zoomer, which looks at 9 different proteins in dairy, not just one. So it's
Yeah.
much more comprehensive to see, is your immune system fighting dairy? But to begin with, you can do coconut yogurt. Every health food store now carries those. As far as I know, it's very common and easy to find.
Absolutely.
A question from Jen on Zoom. Does your book address protocols for oxalate sensitivity and histamine intolerance?
Say that again? Does what?
Does your book address protocols for oxalate
Yes.
sensitivity and histamine intolerance?
Not specifically for oxalate. I think that's a bit more specialized, but sorry, I've had the bell ringing for a moment. But histamine is accounted for in the types. Yeah,
Mhm,
and avoiding
mhm.
histamine-rich foods. Sorry, I have to
Great.
just let someone in quickly.
Of course, of course. And we're actually we've just gone past the hour, so that bell that's ringing is timely. So it's a timely ring. So the link for Dr. Vincent's book is here. Please, everyone, consider ordering the book. I think, and I'm sure I've not seen the book yet, but with my books, I always say this, open the book to any page, read one paragraph. If you don't like it, close the book and put it back on the shelf. That I think you'll find that Dr. Vincent has a great way of expressing, as you can see today, answering questions and expressing his ideas in easily to understand language. That the visuals, I'm sure, are great. And I would encourage everyone to include this book as part of your library as you're expanding your knowledge. And Dr. Vincent, thank you so much for taking the time to be with us. Wish you the very best with the launching of this book, and that thousands of people will pick up on it.
Thank you so much for having me on here. And it's so great that you do this. And I'm sure people benefit from it incredibly.
Thank you so much. All right, everyone, we will see you next week. Bye-bye.